You're successful. You're rational. You're respected. But relationships? They feel like distractions. Or worse, threats to your control. And here's the paradox. You might be an emotionally unavailable man and not even know it. This isn't about being cold, cruel, or incapable. In fact, you may be admired for your composure, your drive, your independence. But what if those very strengths are covering something up? What if what you call focus is actually fear of being seen, of being known? Let's be clear. Emotional unavailability isn't always loud. It's not always expressed through detachment or anger. Sometimes it hides in the quiet routines, in the overcommitment to work, in the avoidance of confrontation, or in your polished, composed answers that never go too deep. So today, we're not here to talk about feelings. We're here to dissect the system that blocks them. Because emotional unavailability isn't a flaw, it's a mechanism, a deeply ingrained defense structure built not by adulthood, but by the survival instincts of a much earlier version of you. And that's where this conversation begins. If you're the kind of man who finds it easier to solve complex problems than to sit with emotional discomfort, then listen closely. This is not about changing who you are. It's about understanding what your psyche has been doing behind the scenes, often without your awareness, to protect you from vulnerability at all costs. You see, the mind doesn't simply forget pain. It reorganizes around it. And for many emotionally unavailable men, the roots stretch deep into childhood, where connection and vulnerability were not rewarded, but punished or ignored. Maybe you learned early that emotions were inefficient, that expressing need equated to weakness, that being strong meant being unaffected. The child in that environment doesn't adapt by becoming more open. He survives by shutting down, by constructing a protective shell of emotional logic, strategic detachment, and rational control. And here's the twist. That adaptation works. It gets you through school. It earns promotions. It keeps things clean and under control until connection is required, until someone asks, "What are you feeling?" And your mind freezes, not because you don't care, but because it never learned the language of emotional presence. It's not your fault, but it is your system. The issue is not lack of emotion. Emotionally unavailable men are not hollow. They're armored. But armor, by design, restricts movement. It limits vulnerability. And eventually, it limits intimacy, depth, and even professional fulfillment. When you find yourself thriving in your role, but feeling chronically disconnected, when success stops being satisfying, that's not burnout. That's emotional paralysis. You may have all the metrics of external achievement, but internally, your nervous system has been conditioned to suppress emotional responsiveness. Because responsiveness once equaled risk. Let's call this what it is, a trauma-informed adaptation. Not trauma as in something catastrophic happened, but trauma as in the consistent lack of emotional safety, the kind that teaches a young mind to trade connection for control. So, what does this look like in practice? You may be emotionally unavailable if you find yourself avoiding deep conversations, even with people you trust, intellectualizing your emotions instead of feeling them, getting irritated when others express too much emotion, struggling to identify your own feelings in real time, defaulting to isolation when under stress, feeling guilty or weak for needing emotional support, succeeding professionally, yet feeling numb relationally. These are not flaws, These are signals. Signals that your psyche has been working overtime to protect a vulnerable core you no longer even acknowledge. Signals that, long ago, you made a deal. Emotional suppression in exchange for psychological safety. But that deal comes at a cost. The cost is felt in the quiet moments, the ones where everything is fine on the outside, but feels hollow inside. The cost is in relationships that stay shallow, even if they're long. It's in your inability to trust closeness, even when you crave it. Here's the truth. Emotional unavailability isn't about apathy. It's about adaptation. And once you see it, you can begin to question it. Not with shame, not with blame, but with clarity. Because the moment you understand that your emotional detachment was once a brilliant survival strategy, is the moment you become free to build something new, something chosen, not inherited, something conscious. In the episodes that follow, we'll break down each of these signs, not just at the behavioral level, but at the psychological core. We'll explore how emotional unavailability quietly shapes your career, your finances, and your ability to lead, not just others, but yourself. This isn't about becoming more emotional. It's about reclaiming the parts of you that had to go silent just to keep you safe. And we start by listening to the silence. You work harder than most. You meet deadlines. You outperform. You lead. But the moment stillness arrives, when there's no task, no target, no crisis to manage, anxiety creeps in. Not panic, not drama, just a quiet, persistent discomfort with doing nothing. This is where emotional unavailability hides in plain sight, beneath productivity, beneath the obsession with purpose, beneath the need to always be moving forward. Let's get to it. Emotional unavailability doesn't just show up in relationships, it shows up in how you structure your entire life. And for many high-functioning men, it wears the mask of ambition. On the surface, this looks like drive, dedication, commitment. But psychologically, it can be a defense, a performance complex, a need to achieve as a substitute for connection. Why? Because connection is unpredictable, vulnerable, messy. But performance? Performance is controllable, validated, measurable. If you were taught, explicitly or implicitly, that love was conditional, that worth was tied to output, that emotion was a liability, then what choice did you have? You adapted. You learned to perform. And not just in work, but everywhere. You learned to stay ahead of feelings by staying busy. You learned to trade openness for results. Let's be honest. There's a high that comes from being needed, from being productive, from being the reliable one. But that high is not intimacy. It's not peace. It's management. And here's the kicker. It works until it doesn't. You start to feel distant from others, even in close relationships. You're present physically, but emotionally, you're dialed out. And eventually, you feel distant from yourself. Because the deeper the disconnect becomes, the more you rely on performance to feel worthy. This is where the cycle tightens. Work becomes refuge. Busyness becomes a shield. Every promotion, every win is proof that you're in control. But what you're really controlling is access. Access to your own vulnerability. At its core, this is emotional dissociation. You're not without emotion.
You're managing emotion through structure, through success, through precision. And while that makes you appear stable, even enviable, it leaves little room for softness, for uncertainty, for asking yourself the most uncomfortable question: what am I actually feeling right now? And if that question feels disorienting, good. That's the edge of the armor. That's where the work begins. Let's bring in the psychology. When a child grows up in an environment where emotional expression is minimized, invalidated, or punished, he doesn't learn to feel less. He learns to regulate emotion by avoiding it. He develops a nervous system conditioned for vigilance, not rest, for performance, not presence. In adulthood, this manifests as success addiction. The dopamine loop isn't driven by greed, it's driven by survival. When emotional safety was scarce, success became the substitute. This isn't narcissism, it's compensation. You compensate for emotional uncertainty by creating cognitive certainty, systems, routines, tasks. You stay moving because if you stop, you might feel something. And that something might remind you of how unsupported you once were. Now here's the deeper layer. Many emotionally unavailable men fear that if they actually allowed themselves to feel, they would collapse under the weight of it. So they avoid feeling at all. And this has consequences, not just for intimacy, but for self-concept. You start to believe that you are your achievements. You don't just fear failure, you fear emotional exposure. Not because you're weak, but because you were never taught how to carry emotional weight without collapsing. That's the real gap. Not emotional absence, but emotional illiteracy. You never learned how to feel and function at the same time. So you chose function. You chose performance. You chose control. And it worked, until it cost you your ability to be fully human. So here's the insight. The emotionally unavailable man isn't disconnected because he's incapable of feeling. He's disconnected because feeling, true emotional presence, was once unsafe, inefficient, or irrelevant in the environments that shaped him. And now, every moment of silence, every instance of vulnerability feels like a regression. But it's not regression, it's reconnection. You won't find fulfillment by optimizing your systems. You'll find it by confronting the parts of you that never learned to feel safe without them. Let that sit. Because in the next episode, we're going deeper into the paradox of intimacy. Why the closer someone gets, the more emotionally unavailable you become. Why presence can feel like exposure. And what that reveals about the emotional architecture you've spent your entire life constructing.
You want closeness. You say you're ready for it. But the moment it shows up, real, unfiltered intimacy, you find yourself shutting down, zoning out, or subtly withdrawing. You tell yourself you're tired, busy, not in the mood to talk. But if you're honest, you weren't tired before that conversation started. You became tired when it got too close. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Emotional unavailability doesn't mean you don't crave intimacy. It means that when intimacy appears, your nervous system doesn't recognize it as safe. And that response isn't logical, it's biological. Many emotionally unavailable men have a paradoxical reaction to intimacy. They desire it, but once it arrives, it triggers a defense response, usually subtle, often unconscious. Why? Because somewhere along the developmental path, closeness became fused with exposure. And exposure once led to pain, shame, or abandonment. So now, closeness feels like standing too close to an open flame. You might be drawn to the warmth, but you're bracing for the burn. Let's break this down. For the emotionally unavailable man, relationships often operate on a subconscious equation. Love equals risk. Presence equals pressure. Vulnerability equals danger. So the closer someone gets, emotionally, psychologically, the more your system interprets it as threat, not connection. This is not a weakness. It's a trauma-informed adaptation. You might maintain eye contact. You might nod and listen. You might even give advice. But none of that means you're present. Presence is not performance. It's not participation. It's being fully emotionally available in the moment with your guard down, your mask off, and your emotions online. But for a man who's learned to armor himself against emotional chaos, that level of openness feels like exposure, not just to others, but to yourself. Let's go deeper. This emotional avoidance is often linked to a specific attachment pattern, avoidant attachment. And avoidant attachment doesn't mean you don't care. It means you were wired to believe that caring too much comes at a cost. That the safest way to stay connected is to stay distant. You might engage in relationships, but only to the point where you still feel in control. Once emotional unpredictability enters the space, your instinct isn't to move closer. It's to manage, retreat, or intellectualize. This is why you often feel more comfortable in roles that require guidance, logic, or solutions, but not emotional depth. And it's why conflict, especially emotional conflict, feels like ambush. Your system interprets emotional exposure as volatility. You weren't taught to co-regulate emotions. You were taught to self-contain them. So when someone asks you to share, to express what you're feeling, to let them in, you don't resist because you don't want to. You resist because your internal wiring doesn't trust that kind of openness. You may even say things like, "I just need space. I don't want to argue. Let's talk when things calm down." But what you're really saying is, "I don't have the emotional tools to engage with this without shutting down." And that's the core of emotional unavailability. Not emotional absence, but emotional underdevelopment. You developed skills. You developed intellect. You developed discipline. But you were never given the space or the safety to develop emotional presence in real time. This creates a double bind. You're expected to show up emotionally, but you never learned how. You want to connect, but you only know how to manage distance. And so every deep relationship eventually starts to feel like a test you can't pass. This is not your fault, but it is your responsibility. Because over time, emotional avoidance becomes relational erosion. Not overnight, not in dramatic ways, but through the gradual withdrawal of presence. The loss of curiosity. The silence that replaces vulnerability. You start to notice that people stop asking how you feel because they've learned you won't answer. You start to feel misunderstood, but you've said nothing that could be understood. You're not being rejected, you're being reflected. And that reflection is this: when emotional availability is unfamiliar, presence feels like pressure. When connection wasn't safe growing up, connection now feels like a trap. But here's the turning point. The very thing you avoid is the doorway back to self-ownership. Presence isn't about being emotional. It's about being available. And availability requires one thing: capacity. The capacity to tolerate discomfort. The capacity to stay present during emotional intensity. The capacity to feel without fleeing. That capacity doesn't emerge overnight, but it doesn't emerge at all if you keep avoiding the mirror. So ask yourself this: when someone gets close, do I open or do I manage? Because the way you answer that will determine whether you're building connection or protecting yourself from it. In the next episode, we'll examine the most socially acceptable mask emotionally unavailable men wear, logic, and why your ability to rationalize might be blocking you from everything you claim to want.
You pride yourself on being rational, calm, unshaken. When others lose control, you remain composed. When emotions rise, you stay level-headed. That's admirable. It's useful. It often saves you from unnecessary conflict. But beneath that logic, what's been buried? Here's the truth few men want to face. Logic isn't always clarity. Sometimes it's camouflage. When emotional availability threatens the system you've built, one based on control, performance, and certainty, your mind will default to the most socially acceptable defense mechanism available: intellectualization. You don't yell. You don't cry. You explain. You analyze. You turn the experience into data. And at first glance, that looks like maturity. But in reality, it's often emotional suppression disguised as composure. Let's break this down. Emotionally unavailable men tend to overdevelop their cognitive faculties and underdevelop their emotional fluency. Not because they're cold, not because they don't care, but because early on they learned this equation: emotion equals instability, and instability equals risk. So to survive emotionally volatile environments, homes where anger exploded without warning, or where affection was withheld unless earned, these men learned to detach, to think instead of feel. They built an identity around objectivity, logic, and problem-solving, and that identity became their shield. It protected them from chaos, but it also cut them off from themselves. Over time, this manifests as chronic emotional detachment, not just from others, but from their own internal world. They become masters at dissecting feelings from the outside, but incapable of experiencing them from the inside. It's like trying to describe warmth using only the concept of temperature, but never standing in the sun. Here's how this shows up. You intellectualize your pain instead of processing it. You explain why you're not angry instead of allowing yourself to be. You rationalize why others overreact instead of acknowledging your impact. You speak in abstracts, theories, or logic loops, anything to avoid direct emotional engagement. This isn't intelligence, this is insulation. Your logic becomes a fortress, and inside that fortress, you feel safe, but alone. Because no one can access your inner world, not even you. Now, let's go deeper. In Jungian terms, this is a classic over-identification with the persona, the part of you that faces the world, polished, competent, in control. But what lies beneath is the shadow, the repressed emotional material you've deemed inconvenient or unsafe to express. The longer the persona dominates, the more distant the shadow becomes. And eventually, your identity fractures. You become the man who can explain everything, but feel nothing. This creates a psychological imbalance. When logic becomes your only lens, your relationships become negotiations. Your intimacy becomes performance. Your leadership becomes command, not connection. You mistake emotional detachment for strength, but strength isn't the absence of emotion, it's the capacity to hold it without collapse. And if you're honest, there are cracks in that logic mask. You feel irritated when people get too emotional. You feel awkward when someone asks what you're feeling. You retreat into problem solving when conflict arises, offering solutions instead of presence. Why? Because you never learned that feelings don't need to be fixed. They need to be felt. And that's the core issue. You treat emotions like system errors. Isolate the bug, eliminate the malfunction. But emotions aren't errors. They're messengers. Ignore them long enough, and the message comes out sideways through frustration, withdrawal, burnout, or chronic disconnection. Your logical mind can build systems. It can create strategies. It can lead teams, but it cannot substitute for emotional presence. Because presence isn't about having the right words. It's about tolerating the discomfort of not having them. It's about sitting in emotional uncertainty without immediately reaching for a fix. So here's the challenge. The next time someone brings emotion to you, whether it's grief, confusion, or joy, pause. Resist the urge to explain, fix, or interpret. Just feel. Not because you owe it to them, but because you owe it to the part of you that's never known safety without certainty. That part deserves more than analysis. It deserves acknowledgement. In the final episode, we'll strip away the last layer, the cost. What it truly means, professionally, emotionally, spiritually, to remain emotionally unavailable, and what it takes to reclaim your full capacity as a man, not just as a thinker, but as a whole human being.
The disconnection beneath your discipline, the distance behind your drive, the silence wrapped in logic, the aversion to closeness that you couldn't quite explain. And now, the question stares back at you. What has all of this cost you? Not just in relationships, but in your ability to fully experience your own life. You see, emotional unavailability is not just about what you avoid, it's about what you never get to feel. The joy you mute, the love you deflect, the peace you never reach, no matter how much you accomplish. The deeper truth is this: when you suppress pain, you suppress everything else with it. Your emotional life doesn't work like a control panel. You don't get to selectively numb sadness without numbing wonder. You don't get to mute vulnerability and still expect to feel real connection. It's all or nothing. And for too long, you've chosen nothing, quietly, rationally, without even realizing it. But your body knows. Your nervous system knows. That burnout you explain away as work stress, that detachment you write off as needing space, that creeping sense of isolation in a room full of people who admire you. These are not random. They're signals. Signals that your emotional self, the one you've kept buried under years of control, is no longer willing to stay silent. So what do? You begin by understanding what you've built. You don't shame it, you don't destroy it, you study it. Because every emotionally unavailable man built his defenses for a reason.
They were brilliant adaptations in a context that demanded them. But what protected you then is constraining you now. You've built a fortress to keep pain out, but that same fortress has become a prison, and the longer you stay inside it, the more life passes you by, unfelt, unclaimed, unlived. Let's name the 7 signs for what they really are. 1. You intellectualize instead of empathize. 2. You maintain surface-level relationships, even in long-term ones. 3. You rely on logic to avoid emotional exposure. 4. You feel overwhelmed by others' emotions even when you care. 5. You default to isolation in moments that require connection. 6. You chase professional success to compensate for inner voids. 7. You experience discomfort with vulnerability, even your own. These are not just habits, they are survival strategies. But survival is not the same as living. So what does reconnection look like? It's not dramatic, it's not loud, it doesn't mean crying on command or becoming someone you're not. It means facing the part of you that you've disowned. The boy who learned to shut down because it was safer. The teenager who turned pain into perfectionism. The man who mastered control but never felt fully seen. It means allowing yourself to be uncomfortable, not as a weakness, but as a signal that you're stepping out of the armor. Reconnection means you stop trying to fix every feeling. You start listening instead. You begin to ask, not what do I do about this, but can I sit with this and not run? And that moment when you stay present in discomfort, when you let emotion rise without managing it, when you allow another person to see you as you are, not as you perform, that is not a breakdown. That is the beginning of freedom. Because the goal isn't to become emotional, it's to become whole, to reclaim the parts of you that went silent for too long, to build not just success, but congruence, to finally feel at home in your interior world. This is not a quick fix. This is not a technique. This is a reckoning, one that demands courage, not to fight, but to feel, not to conquer, but to connect. Because in the end, emotional unavailability is not solved through strategy. It's dissolved through presence. And the moment you stop running, the moment you sit still enough to hear the parts of you you've ignored, that's the moment your real life begins.